has been a great honor to be invited to give a talk today. My name is Jung-Chin Shen. I'm a professor at York University. Today I would like to talk a little bit about challenges and opportunities facing Canada economy in the post-COVID world. In particular, I would like to talk about some problems facing Canada now and what would be the possible solution to that. So I will begin my talk to offer a little bit overview of Canada economy and followed by a few issues and problems Canada is facing now and concluded by a possible solution to the problem. So as you can see from the slides, if you look at Canada GDP size, ranking, share, and growth, you'll find that I divided over the past 50 years into 5 periods, 1 decade as 1 period. If you're beginning from 1970s, Canada GDP was 164.6 billion per year and ranked as number 8 in the world. And it goes to 1980s, 1990s, and 2000 and roughly remain the same until 2019, which means from 2010 until 2019, Canada GDP ranking lowered from number 8 to number 11. And you can also look at the economic growth rate. In 1970s, we had a very, very high economic growth rate, was 3.5%, and then 2.8, 2.3, and 2.1, 2.3. So what does it mean? It means that, yes, our economic growth rate is not as good as 1970s, but at that time, because it was a global phenomenon. So overall, we can say that the 2.1, 2.3 economic growth rate, maybe they are not great, but that's also not bad if you compare to other advanced economies. So I think overall, we are doing fine. But having said that, maybe we need to look at a little bit more details. If you look at Canada's GDP composition, meaning we are not just looking at the total volume. We want to look at each element of our GDP, and then you can see that from 1970s, the household consumption, which is the biggest part of our GDP, was 54%. And over time, you see that the household consumption over the past 50 years increased from 54% to 56.8%, increased a little bit. And capital formation in 1970 was 24.4%. And then we go up and down, but in 2010, it's 24.2%, so roughly remain the same. So a lot of people would like to ask about the government expenditure. So because over the past 50 years, Canada has experienced a lot of economic ideology change, and we also change our policy accordingly. For example, in 1980s, and Canada joined UK and America, and then start to deregulate many industries and to join the new liberal movement. So maybe a lot of people will expect that follow the trend, and maybe the expenditure of our government will decrease over time, but actually it's not the case. As you can see from the slides, in 1970s, the government expenditure was 21.5%, and then it's up and down, and then until year 2000, it's 19.8%, and 2010, it became 20.9%. So roughly speaking, even our economic ideology and policy change over time, but the government expenditures reduce only a little bit, very, very marginally. So we don't really see any significant change. Okay, the first 2 slides, I just offer a little bit very, very basic information regarding Canada economy. So now I would like to move on to some issues facing Canada economy. The first thing I would like to bring your attention is the share of industry value added has been declining over the past 50 years. So what's the definition of industry? Industry including mining, manufacturing, and utility. As you can see from the slides, In 1970s, and the share of industry represent 28.9%. And then over time, the number keep reducing. Until 2010, the percentage reduced to 20.3%. And as you can see, the growth rate also reduced a little bit. So it seems like even our economics, the overall is doing well. But if you look at specific category, especially when you look at the industry, you will find that our industry shares in terms of value added, meaning how much value you created, or in the general terms, meaning how much money you make, how much profit you make. Actually, in terms of a percentage of GDP, it's a decline. And the industry actually including mining, manufacturing, and utilities. So what is probably is more important is about manufacturing. So here, I would like to isolate manufacturing. Let's look at the share of manufacturing and over the past 50 years. And it will be the same as the trend of the industry. In 1970s, the share of manufacturing represent 20.3% of our GDP, and the number keep reducing and actually reduced very, very fast. Until 2010, the percentage reduced to 10.6%. So which is almost like a half of 1970s. So in other words, over the past 50 years, the share of manufacturing in our economy has reduced by 50%. Of course, you might argue that that is a trend because when a country's economy becomes mature, of course, the service sector usually increase and manufacturing sectors reduce. But even so, if you see the Canada's the share of our manufacturing, actually we reduce too fast and too big. 50 years, we have reduced by 50% in terms of the share of GDP. So just to put into perspective, I would like to make a little bit comparison. If you just compare like the share of transportation, government expenditure, and export, when we look at these numbers, how does it differ from the trend we see from manufacturing sectors? If you look at the share of transportation, over time in 1970s, it was a little bit high and then reduces to 7.9, 7.8%. So roughly speaking, over the past 50 years, you see the share of transportation in terms of contribution to GDP, you don't see too much change. And the same thing you can say for the government expenditure, as I talked about earlier. So now, it probably will be more interesting to look at the export. If you look at the share of export, in 1970s, Canada's export represent 23.2% of our GDP, and the growth rate was for 4.0%. And over time, it actually increased and reached its maxima in 2000s. It reached to 36%. And then when it moved to 2010, it reduced to 30%. So what does it mean? It means, roughly speaking, we can guess that maybe now Canada is more integrated to the global economy compared to 50 years ago. However, here probably this is one thing we can talk about, which I call it China myth. Because very often we read from magazine, we read from newspaper, we just watch from internet. They keep saying that China is the number 2 exporting country of Canada. And which obviously tells how important that China goods will sell to the international market. However, if you just look at renting, I think that will be a little bit misleading. In the sense that if you look at the total number, obviously our number 1 exporting country is the United States, number 2 in China. But the difference between number 1 and number 2 is huge. we actually sell more than 75% of our goods to United States and less 5% to China. So that's true. China still represents number 2 exporting country to Canada. But the reality is the percentage will be not as high as most news or magazine or even internet article would suggest. And what is more interesting is if you look at the composition of export, meaning when we sell product to the international market, what do we sell? In year 2000, we sell like a primary represent in terms of a total export. If a total all product we sell to the international market, this is 100%. And primary goods represent 25%, and resource-based goods represent 19.2%. And 2010, the percentage of primary goods even increased from 25% to 30%, and resource-based goods still 19.1%. So what does it mean? It means that even, as I said earlier, even it looks like we are more integrated to the global economy, but the reality is most of the product we sell to the international market are based on primary goods or resources-based goods. In contrast, if you look at what's the percentage of high-tech product, usually high-tech product represent the highest value-added products. What's the percentage of our high-tech products in terms of our exporting goods? In 2000, it was 10.1%. And what we probably need to worry about more is over time, the number even reduced. In 2010, the number reduced from 10.1% to 8.7%. So what does it mean? It means that over time, the product we sell to international market still based on primary goods or resource-based goods. In contrast, we do sell a little bit high-tech product to the international market. But the bad news is over time, the percentage of our high-tech products in exports actually reduced. If you look at the trend, I think this trend more or less consistent with what I talk about the trend of decline of manufacturing sector. So I think these two more or less related. So what kind of message we get here? So basically we see that first, our manufacturing sectors, it declined significantly, reduced by 50% over the past 50 years. And secondly, it also damaged the valuable product, meaning high-tech product, high value-added product we sell to international market. And compared to 2000s and 2010s, we even sell less high-tech product to the international market. So it probably tells us that it could be something wrong about our economy. This is probably already being covered because if you look at Canada's economy and you don't see too much problem. But if you really look at the detail, you look at the competition, now I think that is a problem. So now let's look at what would be the problem when our manufacturing sector decline over time. What kind of problem we are facing?